All right, looks like recording.
And I just sent the share screen
Yep,
request.
you've got it, so we are good. Okay, we are recording, so we are good to go. Trying to think, you got your share recording, everything else. All right, so Matt is in office with me, so is Oscar on the other side of the suite. I sent emails to the other people, so they might hop on later. They were the ones from like the private
Yep.
institutions, so we'll see. I mean, worst case, I'll just send them the recording and we can go from there. Because they were previously people that participated in our survey, so
Great.
they'll help send it over. So, all right. Well, thank you to those that are joining us today. We're going to dive into part one of the student health surveys. So, biggest thing to know about why we did this set. Uh, Jen's been working with the original developers of the Mockbee, which is the modified, or well, ours is the modified version of that survey. So, we wanted to get a more in-depth look with what it means to really recruit, how to do it tactfully, and why that matters when we are looking at using this for student affairs. I sent her copies of like our reports, our survey. It's slimmed down, how we're integrating that, just so we can get a more tailored lens into using this in the future. And then part two will be in the next 2 weeks, and we'll cover, we've got the data. Now, what do we do with that? So that'll be part two later. But just figured I would give you that little bit of info there as we transition, and I'll let Jen take over.
All right. I'm going to get my slides up. Thanks, folks, for folks who are here synchronously and folks who are here watching the recording. I know it's an exciting time of year to be in higher ed and student affairs. Ah, all right. Um, but I appreciate you being here today. There we go. So this is, as Annabelle alluded to, this is part one of two on student health surveys. And this is talking about some strategies to promote representative participation. So I know a lot of you just did a big survey this spring with the, right, ACB. Am I getting it right?
Ours is the Ike sub, the Illinois Assessment
Ike
of
sub,
College
Ike
System.
sub. I know I'm learning how to pronounce the
Yeah.
acronym, the Ike sub.
Yep.
So knowing that it might be 2 years before you're thinking about recruiting again, but there's groundwork you can lay now. But some of you also might be in the intervening years be doing something like National College Health Assessment. So I'll talk to both of those. But my name is Jen Jacobson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Executive Director of Health and Wellness at Macalester College, which is a small college in St. Paul, Minnesota. I did grow up in the Chicago suburbs, and I've learned to always say the Chicago suburbs because my very first week of college in Iowa, I thought I was being helpful and I told someone I was from Chicago, and someone not even part of the conversation whipped his head around and said, "You are not from Chicago. I'm from Chicago. You're from the place with the shopping malls and the car dealerships." And I grew up in Schaumburg, so if you know anything about Schaumburg, that is actually the most apt description of Schaumburg that I've ever heard. So I am somewhat familiar with Illinois, and a couple springs ago, I got to be down for the Illinois Higher Ed Center meeting in Springfield, and got to spend some time in person with folks doing this work in Illinois. First, I want to thank Annabelle for inviting me and all the support in offering these two sessions, but also you all for all of the work that you do. Supporting our students and helping them make choices that are more in alignment with their goals and values for their time at college. A little bit about me. I've been in higher ed for almost 30 years at small liberal arts colleges. I am an NCCHA member right, part of the ACHA, but I'm in the North Central region, but I've been crashing conferences. So I was recently at the Central College Health Association in April, crashing that one and talking about the Mockbee there and learning more about the Mockbee. But my first career was as a Division III men's and women's track and field coach. And where you would see similar with that in survey data is both are very measurable. I really like being able to quantify things. I've been leading campus surveys since 2013. When I had an NCAA Choices grant, I was leading the survey of student athlete norms by Perkins and Craig with the athletic department at Grinnell College. I've been the principal investigator for the ACHA, NCHA, which is the survey I'm most familiar with, 4 times. And also, McAllister's a JED campus, so we also did a Healthy Mind survey here. I love quantitative data and knowing surveys and what we can interrogate and what we could ask. I'm pretty good with the descriptive statistics and I know what questions I want to ask about relationships. But I also want to say I also love our institutional research office because they are the ones who hire students to run the statistical software to actually perform some of our more advanced data analysis. So what you're hearing from today is someone who really likes survey work, but who is not deep in quantitative skills. And I hope that makes it feel more accessible for some folks if you also aren't great at SPSS or R or some of that software like I struggle with. But it also means there are times on campus and working in student affairs. I feel like Leslie Knope, right? All I have on my side are facts and science, and people hate facts and science. Sometimes people get uncomfortable in that when you're like, here comes Jen with that survey data again. So thinking about how we make it valuable for our partners across campus. I am curious if people, right? We only have a couple of you, so you can unmute and share. But like, how familiar are you with student surveys? Are you someone who's less familiar? You've seen some of the data, you help conduct it, or you're the principal investigator, data analyst lead on your campus. Sean, what's your role at Lewis and Clark?
I'm dean of students.
Okay.
We were also a JED campus, so I pushed out that survey for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then, there's some climate and other surveys that I've pushed out as well. So, my answer would be three based on your scale.
My very scientific scale here.
You're very scientific,
Yes.
Likert-ish scale.
Yes. And I don't know if any of our other folks, Oscar, Matt, Melinda, I don't know if you're like having to perform multitasking now or not, but if not, if you want to unmute and let us know kind of your level of familiarity, that would be helpful.
I was going to
Yeah,
share,
I,
Oscar's my GA, so he's the one that actually runs all the aggregate and the crosstabs for us
Ah,
when it comes to our survey. Um, and then Matt helps with the Herc side of things, like he might be popping in and out. But he helps do like the NCHA surveys and they just did like a financial well-being. So he'll
oh, great.
handle like the more health promotion side at Eastern.
Yes. Okay. And then Melinda, I saw you on mute.
Yes, I also stuck it in the chat box, but I've helped with a few studies on campus, including the Healthy Mind study. So I'd say we're probably about a three as well.
Okay. And where are you?
North Park University in the
Oh,
city
sure.
of Chicago.
Yes, I know you're properly in the city. Great.
Yes.
Thanks. Okay, and you already answered some of that question, right? So a lot of you do the Ike sub. It might be one of the reasons you're here. Some of you do NCHA. I heard Healthy Minds, and you might do something else. So I always like to come back to our learning outcomes. Like, what did we say we would do after this session? I'm sure you already have some of the ability to describe benefits of conducting a student health survey on your campus. But if I can offer anything that helps you strengthen that or think about that in a new way, I hope that's useful for you. Identify campus partners that can help promote survey participation and plan all aspects of conducting a student health survey that generates representative participation. So for folks who use NCHA, right, they always have a copy of the current survey online. It's a nationally validated survey, which includes additional standalone measures. It's confidential, web-based, and takes 20 to 30 minutes to complete, depending on kind of what boxes you're checking. And then the Ike sub, and it sounds like most of you would be highly familiar, but talking about alcohol and other substance use, mental health, it is online and anonymous and takes 15 to 25 minutes to complete. So right, and talking to Annabelle, and it sounds like your research team is here. When participation's high enough for the Ike sub, you all do get an aggregate report, so that lets you look at how your institutional data matches kind of a baseline reference group and how it's different. If you're doing NCHA, certainly you can download. And I work exclusively with undergraduates, so I take care when I want to look at national benchmarking data that I'm looking at the undergraduate reference group report and not the everyone together, because graduate students are less comparable for our population. Key topic areas, if you're less familiar with the NCHA: general health, campus climate, nutrition, BMI, physical activity, food security, healthcare utilization, impediments to academic performance, violence, abusive relationships, personal safety, tobacco, alcohol, and other drug use. That's how they frame it, which I think is really interesting. Sexual behavior, mental health, well-being, acute conditions, ongoing or chronic conditions, and sleep. In the Ike sub, right, talking about alcohol use, there's things in reading the Ike sub that I'm very envious that you all conduct this, because there's great questions and information in there that I wish I could ask. We're an NCHA campus and we already kind of max out our custom questions, but I really like the questions in there about recovery. It asks, really very typical of lots of surveys, past 2-week drinking behavior. I love that it asks where their self-reporting drinking occurs, because that is so directly then actionable to whoever's doing the alcohol and other drug work on your campus about where you might do interventions, how they obtain their alcohol. That is great information. Their motivations for drinking alcohol and not drinking alcohol, polysubstance use, unwanted outcome from drinking, and super important, not only for themselves, but what they experience as an impact of other students' drinking behaviors, perception of drinking norms on campus, and then some other drug use about prescription drug use, illegal drug use, cannabis use. And again, I'm envious because NCHA does not ask about type of product, and the Ike sub does, and that's really valuable for us. Unwanted outcomes, attitudes and intentions for use, motivations for using or not using, impact of legalization. And again, I think those questions are great. I'm currently doing a practicum for my doctoral degree, and I'm going to be interviewing student affairs professionals across the state of Minnesota about the impacts of state level legalization of adult use cannabis that started here in 2023, to find out how has it shifted the way student affairs professionals are navigating cannabis, what they wish they knew, and how they wish we would share that information. Perceptions of cannabis norms and tobacco use, and intentions to quit tobacco use, which also, again, feels so directly relevant to people offering programming. Questions about mental health and suicidality, experiences of mental health conditions, diagnoses of mental health conditions, where students sought services, other services, barriers to service, suicidality and suicidal thoughts, desire to receive help, and health and referral to others. And one of the things I like when we're in a space talking about substance use, I love that it is also a survey that's asking about mental health, because then it allows you to investigate the relationships between those two things. One of the things that this is our data at Macalester, so please don't share it widely. But one of the things, and the questions show up in the Ike sub too, is, we get questions from our alumni, our parents, and people who say, does Macalester, it seems like we have a lot of anxious and depressed students, like more students at Macalester must be anxious and depressed than other students. And so I thought I would look at that by comparing it with the national undergraduate average. And the thing that I think is worthy of seeing here is the first two questions are asking if you've ever been diagnosed with depression or anxiety. And the Ike sub also asks about diagnosis. Diagnosis also reflects access to healthcare to get the diagnosis, and it reflects levels of stigma that you're willing to go. Because when I look at and say, wow, about 5% more Macalester students than the national average say they've been diagnosed with depression, about 10% say they've been diagnosed with anxiety, maybe we have more students with depression and anxiety at Macalester, but when we look at that, they're 20% more likely to have received psychological or mental health services in the last 12 months, and 16% likely to have visited a medical provider for any reason. That tells me something about our students' access to healthcare, and you need that access in order to get the diagnosis. So I don't know that we have more students with depression and anxiety. We might just have more students to have access to the care that gave them the diagnosis. And because, right, our students actually, we don't want to see any percentage of students score with severe levels of psychological distress on the Kessler 6, but our students actually, about 5% fewer of them than on an average campus score with severe levels, psychological well-being about the same. And then almost 10% more likely to say if a personal problem were really bothering them, they would consider seeking help from a mental health professional, which gives us a little window into stigma. So that is to say, interpret carefully when you look at percentages of students, especially if you're benchmarking it, because we want to try to think hard about what reflects access to diagnosis and what is actually our percentage of students navigating a mental health condition. Um, I really loved also as someone who's been leading alcohol and other drug committees at colleges for 18 years. I really love the key topic areas in the Ike sub asking about perceptions of policies and perceptions of college enforcement of policy. I work just down the road here from Tracy Toomey, who runs the Cannabis Research Center at University of Minnesota School of Public Health, but she's a key author on the NIAAA's College Alcohol Intervention Matrix. And one of the first things she would tell you is that an inconsistently enforced policy is usually worse than no policy at all. So I love the questions about students' perceptions of college enforcement because that's really meaningful in our work. It asks some demographic questions, some of the standard ones we might think about: what year in school do you live on campus or off campus, but also about finances and disability status, which is also really important. It asks for reasons why people might be leaving colleges, and I think all of our colleges are really concerned about retention and thinking about how we get more upstream patterns of early warnings about when a student might leave. So I feel like it's a particularly useful piece of this survey. Those retention questions, and I put NCHA and ICSUB next to each other. A lot of the questions are similar, some of them are different, but one of the things we do know that we see in both surveys is that the difficulties keeping up with academics or academic performance is not number one in either one of them, right? It is more things like, I don't feel like I fit in, I've had negative experience, I don't have friends, I'm lonely, I'm homesick. We do see mental health and physical health concerns being a player in there. But I think it's really interesting, and it means those of us who are familiar with these surveys on campus are in a position to share data. Sometimes our way to get to the table to share data is to say, I have retention information. I have early warning upstream signals of why our students might be considering leaving. So either survey, great information on that. And one of the key takeaways is it is not a high percentage of our students who are struggling academically. It is all of those co-curricular things that falls into our line of work. I just wanted to know ACHA has a modified USDA food insecurity scale in there, and they do risk assists for substance use. And that's been new since 2019, and that's been sort of helpful for us because it gives us an idea of what are some of the unwanted outcomes from substance use that students are self-reporting. And one of our key takeaways is even though we have a lot more students using alcohol than cannabis, we have more students, not just proportionally, but more students scoring moderate or high in the risk assist for cannabis, that they're experiencing outcomes that they don't want, right? And if you've been trained in motivational interviewing, we know those unwanted outcomes can be a hook for behavior change. And lastly, right, this is on NCHA, but it's a good grounding paper for any kind of student health survey you're doing. This was in the American Journal of Health Promotion. But the idea that we see a relationship between academic achievement and health-related behavior in college students, and that to me, the conclusion is really important no matter what survey you're running about stakeholders' investment in students' health. We need to have the academic folks and the student affairs folks at the table together because this is a joint effort and there's a lot of influence back and forth between health behaviors and academic performance. So learning outcome one, we said thinking about describing the benefits of a student health survey on your campus. It helps you tell your story. So that's what we've been using a lot on our campus to tell our story when people are making assumptions about the mental health of Macalester students, or why are we advocating to invest more in health promotion. Allocation of services. When we look at our survey data, and I'm sure when you look at your survey data, we can see things like that our trans non-binary students and our LGBTQ plus students in almost any domain of health, they're not thriving in the same way as their cis and straight peers. And so that helps us think about how we might want to prioritize our services. We also know mental health is such a concern of our students. That's the number one reasons our students see our medical providers too, is actually for helping manage mental health and mental health meds. And that helps us make our case that we do less urgent care, injury, and illness on our medical team, because the needs we see in our own survey data is for mental health. Advocating for services, again, just like we're all concerned about retention, higher ed right now with the headwinds we're facing, no one is probably getting a lot of new FTEs. But you might be in a place where you have a hiring frost, where if someone leaves, you need to advocate to replace that person. Survey data is a great and persuasive way to do that. And then it helps us challenge misperceived norms, right? I went to a conference last fall, College Health Professionals. It was a 3-hour pre-conference on what every college health professional should know about cannabis use. And we went around the room and I asked people, like, what brought you here today? And at least 10 of them said, because most of our students on our campus are using cannabis. I would be surprised if there's actually any campus in the United States where most students have used in the last 30 days. The national average is about 24%. You would have to be at a college where it's more than twice the national average, and that's unlikely. But that is to say, even people working every day in college health can be prone to misperceived norms, and our survey data can help us anchor to something that's closer to accurate. So that norms data, I like to think about, right? Very few people want to come and sit and have a whole meal of our survey data. So we think a lot about one of the benefits of the survey is it gives us a lot of opportunities for bites and snacks of sharing information out. This is Rory with our wheel of norms, and we use it all with survey data. You spin the wheel, you get a category, we ask a question about it. What percentage of Macalester students self-report no sexual partners in the last year? What's the average number of drinks a Macalester student who drinks alcohol reports having the last time they drank? Now that adult use cannabis is legal in Minnesota, can you use it on campus? True or false? Fun fact, 100% of our students get that one right, and only 50% of our faculty and staff get that one right. We give prizes whether you get it right or wrong, because we want people to engage in the learning. That is to say, one of the benefits of running the survey on our campus is we have really relevant campus-based information for outreach opportunities like that. People on campus know anytime they invite me to present or open something up, I'm probably going to do something quiz-based on our survey data. And we often do this when the RA training asks us in, because it's great, because we frame it as, what do our incoming first years need to know, knowing full well that our RAs probably also don't know some of the norms data and have misperceived norms. But it's really fun to have them work on it together in groups, because then you can hear the discussion and the debate about why they think 50% of students on campus use cannabis when the answer is 24%. And it's interesting to learn where the patterns and where that information comes from, and then offering a little bit of education in those debriefs. But it's useful for that. It helps us prioritize programming. In a lot of places, we believe in having naloxone available and naloxone training. And we had a lot of students who say, you should be doing Narcan training at new student orientation. And we say, well, We don't even get to do much on alcohol at new student orientation. And we use some of our data to show um, you're actually more likely on our campus to find a student who has overdosed on alcohol who's in need of help than naloxone. It's not to say we don't train on naloxone and we don't offer information on opioid overdose training, but we try to keep it proportional so we're not losing sight of alcohol is the most common overdose on most of our campuses. Um, I really thought it's interested in the Ike sub about how few students were aware of recovery resources on their campuses and the idea of that helps prioritize if you have recovery resources on your campus, what are other ways you can get the word out? Again, I think about this as of populations. When we look at our students on our campus who self-report having received psychological or mental health services in the last 12 months, we could see that proportionately more trans and non-binary students are looking for those services. And that helps us think about how we're prioritizing our programming and what we're offering. Illinois, like Minnesota, they are both blue states, and we're also living in a time when we might not want to be drawing a lot of attention to our campuses about work that we're doing about equity or health equity. Different than if you're in Missouri, of course, but um, using our student health survey data and thinking about how it reflects the different populations on our campus is a way we're doing health equity work without having to name it as health equity work. But also looking at relationships among variables, tying our work to the hot topics on campus. So, right, belonging is such a big topic on our campus. There's a belonging question in the Ike sub survey. There's belonging question NCHA survey. That's what gets us in the door. The retention is what gets us in the door because leadership on our campuses aren't thinking as much as often about substance use. Mental health, especially after the peak of COVID, was a big conversation. And we tried to, anytime we were asked to come in and talk about mental health, we also talked about substance use because of the relationship between those two things. Relationships amongst variables. I'm going to show you the data I have because I already admitted at the beginning I'm not great with SPSS, so I don't have this for ICSUB, but the research team, right, at Eastern Illinois might be able to help, or folks on your campus might be able to help. This is a relationship between, this is 2025 NCHA data or 2024 NCHA data. Self-reported GPA and the percentage of students reporting excellent or very good overall health. If I were to fake data, I wouldn't make it look this neat and clean and linear. But right, we're probably not surprised in our lines of work about this relationship. Self-reported belonging, the percentage of students strongly agreeing they feel like they belong at their college or university also correlated with GPA, right? When I show this to folks, people say, well, what do you mean by belong? And I said, it doesn't matter what I mean by it. It's how students interpret the question. And they might be thinking about it as academically, I don't know, but it's a really strong relationship. D and F is a little bit of an outlier there, but there's so few students who self-report having a D or an F, it's a little bit funky. I think this one is the most interesting. This is the relationship between belonging and health. So the y-axis is the percentage reporting excellent or very good overall health. And then we see the belonging piece. So when folks on campus are talking about belonging and wanting to solve it through programming, this is our opportunity to say, this is where health matters. This is where our substance abuse prevention work matters because there's an unmistakable relationship here. I really like this. This is my favorite meme I've ever created, right? That we can't disaggregate health GPA and belonging. But also, right, if you have the opportunity to disaggregate by demographics, now this is a larger sample size than just one campus, which lets us see a little bit more, but also a reminder to our folks, if health and belonging are related, and we're looking here at the percentage of our students who self-report excellent or very good overall health, we have disparities between our domestic white and BIPOC students. We have disparities between our straight and LGBTQ plus students. big disparities between our cis and trans students, big disparities between our students who report a disability and those who don't, smaller disparity between domestic and international students, and then a disparity with our non-first gen and first gen students. And we know, right, this isn't even taking into account intersectional identities. If you're first gen domestic BIPOC trans student with a disability, this might really stack up for you. And then we see some differences not quite as pronounced in the belonging piece. But just to say, when we talk about doing health equity work, we know that work that's helping address this, we hope is having a disproportionately positive impact on students where those disparities are felt. We also see this in their suicidality questions in the Ike sub. We also see this in the percent positive for suicidal screening of the differences of it really depends on that student's identity, the likelihood that they're screening positive. This helps us think about advocating for our services, but also just how we're addressing this work on campus. Benefits of the survey, we promote to our institution in order to support administering the survey, right? Like not every student's responsive to an email from the health center where I am or our health promotion office. But we think about how do we get other offices on board so they'll help us promote the survey. I mean, we know within our health center, our medical, our counseling, our health promotion team. Is also really helpful for whoever is responsible for your Drug-Free Schools and Communities Act biennial review. It's an even year, so this is a biennial review year, and that biennial review is looking for quantitative data about what you know about substance use behavior on your campus. So, it might be that some of you are the ones also in charge of it. I'm looking at Sean as a dean of students. You might be in charge of it. But having robust data here really helps with the biennial review process. Your identity-based student programs and support, including first gen low income, athletics, Greek life, disability resources, residential life and orientation, communications, alumni relations, parent family programming, transfer student services. You have some good transfer questions on the Ike sub. Faculty, both educating the faculty so they are not promoting misperceived norms, but also they might use it for class projects. Are there other campus colleagues who could be good partners or are good partners for you in supporting, promoting the survey who benefit from student participation? Did I miss anyone that you all are working with? All right. This is from NCHA. If I went to any campus in the country, these four are going to be the top four. Have any of the following affected performance in the last 12 months? Negatively impacted performance in a class, delayed progress towards a degree. We have stress, anxiety, depression, and sleep difficulties. The funny thing is on the list of things that students can check is also alcohol or other drugs. And only 1.5% of students say it's alcohol and other drugs that delayed my progress. But if you look at this data and you look at it with past 30-day cannabis use, students who self-report any past 30-day cannabis use statistically significantly more likely to say stress, anxiety, depression, and sleep difficulties negatively impacted their performance in a class. If you look at past 2-week binge drinking, that's a question that's on the Ike sub. Students who self-report any past 2-week binge drinking statistically significantly more likely to say depression and sleep difficulties negatively impacted performance in a class or delayed performance towards a degree. And I say this correlation is not causation. What it means is we really need to think about the wraparound care and support of those students, but our students who are struggling in a class, it's not just that we should be thinking about how mental health might be playing a role in that. It seems like for a lot of those students, cannabis or intensive alcohol use is also a factor that maybe they're using in an attempt to manage their anxiety, depression. But that's part of why we need to be at the table for those academic success conversations. Always a reminder that conducting a survey itself is an intervention. And I pulled a couple things from the Ike sub that I thought were particularly valuable in thinking about surveys as interventions. So I love this question of what's a reason you choose not to use marijuana or cannabis? And it gives a whole list of reasons. If I'm a student who's either choosing not to use, this might feel really affirming to me because I might see some of my reasoning in here and I might think of additional reasons where I'm like, yeah, that really reaffirms why I'm choosing not to use. If I'm a student who uses marijuana or cannabis, this might actually help me make some connections of things that would be benefits if I choose to use less often, or chose not to use at all. So this in and of itself is an intervention for students when they look at this, either affirming why they don't use cannabis or offering some kind of non-judgmental considerations of why they might choose not to use. Um, I really like, right? This has harm reduction, risk reduction strategies for students who choose to drink alcohol. So someone might be like, I'm really careful when I choose to drink alcohol. And by reading this list, they might get some ideas of other strategies they can layer in for safer use. And then, right, have you experienced any of the following due to your tobacco or nicotine use? This maps really closely onto that risk assist that I mentioned before, but more specific to nicotine use. But again, this is actually a really nice bite-sized way to educate students on possible outcomes from tobacco or nicotine use that's actually presented in a non-confrontational way. No one is telling students, nicotine does all these things, but it's asking students to step back and consider if your nicotine use, are you noticing some of these things? So really great pieces here where the Ike sub in and of itself is an intervention. The other nice thing about the Ike sub is the breadth of resources it offers right in the survey with live and clickable links. That's also an intervention to help students know what resources are available. Learning outcome two, identifying key campus partners that can help promote survey participation, right? And I don't have a lot in this section because we already named all of those groups that might have a vested interest in helping promote survey participation. But thinking about who might be most interested, not necessarily in the whole data set, but in specific parts. So for us, student success, really interested because we're the only place that's asking at a population level of why might you be considering leaving campus. Depending what's in this, our disability resources is really interested in promoting this because we can help sort the data by disability status. So thinking about what parts of the survey might be particularly relevant, I really like the Ike sub has questions about if you're seeking help. It asks about other types of helpers on campus other than clinicians, and those folks might have a vested interest. And we get support in different ways. We have some faculty who offer extra credit for students taking the survey. We have our disability services will post information about the survey in their space, but they will let their student workers take the survey on their paid time. So thinking about strategies that way. We also, when I first got here, athletics, so 28% of our students at McAllister are student athletes. And when I first got here, only 18% of the participants for the survey were varsity student athletes. So really having a conversation with the AD and the athletics department to say, you guys are competitive and measurable and care about outcomes. Certainly, you can set a goal that the participation in the survey, it should be proportional to the percentage of student athletes on campus. And we got there up to the 28%. Some of our coaches let students start the survey during practice time. Our athletic trainers were really good about promoting it for the person who's sitting in the ice tub. That's a time you can do a 15-minute survey. So thinking about that. The other part was our international student programs. About 14% of our students at McAllister are international students, but our response rate was really low. And so it was meeting with our institutional or our international student program staff and their student leaders to say, Our survey is missing your voice. We make decisions, we set priorities, we think about our budget allocation based on the results of this survey. We're underserving our international students if your voice isn't proportional in the survey. And they became really good partners in promoting it. And you can see we had a pretty big jump in the percentage of our students who are international students. We know our overall goal, and I know it sounds like a heavy lift, is we want to get 30% of all of our students that we ask to participate in a survey to participate for it to feel generalizable to campus. 30% is a high goal. A more reachable goal is we would like the survey participation to look roughly proportional to the populations we have on our campus, knowing that cisgender men always tend to have the lowest participation rates in health survey. And that's not just college health surveys, that's any health survey. If you work in health and wellness in a male-dominated industry, it's one of the things where if there's health screening things, you mail it to the house, because if there's a woman in the household, she's actually more likely the family gatekeeper to health and wellness. So the thinking about that, and then on to learning outcome 3 here in our home stretch. Planning all aspects of conducting a survey that generates this representative student participation. The timing of the survey and reminders. What I have learned in the last 18 years is that Sundays are a time when our students are engaged in productive procrastination. They are procrastinating their homework and want to do so in a way that still feels valuable. So, when you have flexibility, when you offer a survey, what we have learned is we open it on a Sunday, and our survey might be open for 2 weeks, but we keep it open for 3 Sundays because Sundays are our highest participation date. And that's also when we time some of our reminders. We try to vary it up, but always on Sundays. And it depends on the survey and what kind of information you're using. Your team here at EIU would know what ICSUB offers. NCHA, I get live updates. I can refresh and see how many people have taken this survey. And I let really our key student leaders know, hey, our goal was to get such and such percent. We have 5% more to go. How can you help promote? We're close to our goal. How do we do that? Engaging those student groups and students with social capital. That's one of the ways, right? Because they will have influence on other students. Engaging with those colleagues and offices who might benefit. Show you use the data. And so much of part 2 on the 27th is going to be ways you might be showing how you use the data. No one wants to take a survey that goes into a black hole, right? Like all of us who may have taken a survey, a staff climate survey or some other survey in our staff roles on our campuses, know how we feel when we never see that data again versus when we're in some sort of staff council meeting and they show how they're using the data. So thinking about what your successful strategies might be that you can build upon. Marketing and how you market. We started asking our students and some of our student like health promotion leaders, what would motivate a student to take this survey? And we'll talk about incentives in a minute, but like, why would a student expend the effort? And the feedback we heard, right, is McAllister students want to have a voice in what's happening on campus. So we did ours with use your voice. It's the upper right-hand thing was our tagline. But it was really interesting when I was learning about the mock bee that they are also using similar language, your school, your voice. So really having an opportunity to ask some of your students, what would motivate you to do this? For both, we'll get to incentives in a second, but thinking about what is the benefit for them beyond those incentives? Custom questions are another way both to get other campuses invested, but also sometimes your students invested, but increases the relevance to your work. We had a Department of Justice Office of Violence Against Women grant where we were bringing community-based advocates onto our campus to hold office hours. And we need to have measurement to report back in the grant. So we added a custom question about, are you aware of these advocates on campus? Remember, every survey is an intervention. So even having this question was educating more students that we have advocates, but it gave us a concrete data point to report back and present back to the Department of Justice. This is my favorite custom norms question. How often are all-nighters academically necessary? I conducted this on two separate campuses. The answer was eerily the same. 65% of students said all-nighters are never academically necessary. It is the biggest norms gap on our campus. Now, it's not a behavior question, it's an attitudes question. Doesn't mean they're not pulling all-nighters, but it's actually one of our biggest social norms gaps that we've been able to strategize about. The other thing, right? Like I ask about preference for accessing counseling service as our center, either in person or over Zoom. For two reasons. We were remote during the height of COVID, and when we started needing to bring staff back more days a week, I needed to show our staff it was because our students preferred in-person counseling, but also I'm thinking in the long term and waiting for the day, as college resources tighten up, if our senior leadership team, they've never asked this, but if they were to ask, hey, Gen Z, they seem really interested in doing things online. What if we replaced a counselor with an app with online counseling in that? It gives me the information to say, hey, you might be surprised, but over 90% of our students say they prefer in-person counseling. So, you and I might make an assumption about how Gen Z wants to connect with people, but when we look at the survey data, this is what it shows us. So thinking about how to make those custom questions work for you. Individual incentives for achieving high participation rates. We think some about what our students' needs are, knowing that about 29% of our students are food insecure. We try to think about ways we can offer some things that some cooking things, some non-perishable goods, some things that might help meet those needs. We always struggle with and think about, right? Because like anyone else, cisgender men are proportionally our lowest participation group. What incentives appeal to them or any other group generally underrepresented in your health surveys? And then we always try to think about what we can do in addition to gift cards, because again, I mentioned 14% of our students are international. Our international students pay 30% income tax on gift cards. So that becomes a not very great incentive for our international students. So thinking other alternatives. I have this picture here of our baby Highland cow because McAllister recently changed our athletics mascot to the Highland cow. And our very strategic director of health promotion bought a number of stuffed baby Highland cows. And that was an incredibly persuasive, really specific to McAllister incentive. But it's knowing what works on your campus. I've also on small campuses done some collective incentives in addition to individual. At one campus, we had a very popular director of residential life. He's right there, John Sexton. And he was very clear. He was afraid of llamas. And he said, if you hit this participation rate, I will kiss a llama. The really dangerous thing when you're in rural Iowa, when someone says that, is actually, I knew someone who had a llama. This llama's name is Maya. And we actually set this up as a collective goal. And as you can imagine, in a campus that's 88% residential, the RAs were super motivated to get the director of residential life to do a thing. And that really helped with our participation. Someone looking closely might realize John there has a carrot in his mouth. So the llama is going to take the carrot from his mouth because we also wanted to model consent. So that was a great event. Less specific to us, we also one year, again, being in a rural community, we offered bringing a food truck to campus on reading day if students hit a certain success rate. And then that is our president and our vice president of student affairs offering fruit smoothies to students. And so that was a great collective incentive if that's something that could work on your campus. So part 2 in 2 weeks is going to talk about how we share out this data. So data shouldn't live in a drawer or a forgotten file, but sharing out your data regularly. And now that we are less than a year away on our campus from conducting the National College Health Assessment again, every time we're presenting data, we are now saying, and hey, if you want more data, better data, longitudinal data, we're conducting this again in February and March 2027. So because we're going to reach out to you and ask you to help us to promote the survey. Thank you all for attention here at the end of May. I really appreciate it. I hope some of this has been useful to you, and I will look forward to us coming together again in 2 weeks.
All right. Well, thank you so much for all of that. We're gonna end the recording.